Hello and welcome to Unexplored Games, a channel dedicated to lesser known and unique board games. Today I'm talking about a game called Cruel Necessity, the English Civil Wars 1640 to 1653, published by Victory Point Games. This is the first edition of the game. A second edition exists somewhere in the ether. Victory Point Games a few years ago was sold to Tabletop Tycoon, and soon after Tabletop Tycoon bought Victory Point, there was a lot of layoffs of the Victory Point employees. The lead designer of this game has said on Board Game Geek that a second edition of the game exists in complete form, and he's unsure of why they never released it. There are links to a second edition rulebook that supposedly changes some of the values of the achievement cards, making them easier to obtain, as well as makes the game easier in general. I had no interest in looking at the second edition rules, but it's out there if you're interested. Cruel Necessity is one of the States of Siege series solitaire games. I'm not familiar with any of the other games, but they are a group of solitaire games focusing on war or warlike mechanics. This game has a theme of the English Civil Wars, but in my opinion, that's where the war game ends. The majority of the gameplay is managing various political tracks or even managing these armies moving down. But because these armies are just moving down towards London and the player pushes them back, it's just managing more tracks. If it wasn't for the large amount of dice rolling in this game, I'd say this is closer to a Euro than a war game. There is this battle tracker over here, this battle display mat, that is supposed to simulate some of the battles in the English Civil Wars. But the majority of the gameplay here is taking some tiles, flipping them over, comparing numbers, and rolling a few dice. The majority of the outcomes are a draw, and there's even optional rules to skip this entirely, which I'll come to in a little bit later. The first thing you do when you take your turn is flip over one of these cards. Each card will have a section at the top that shows you where the armies move, as well as two events that either have effects on one of the tracks or may have a dice roll modifier that I'll discuss in a minute. These flags up top just indicate which armies are to move and how many times they move. In this example, Ireland moves once, the North moves twice, the West moves once, and Scotland moves once. This is a pretty brutal card. Every army is going to move on this turn. So all you do is just move, for instance, this is the West, it's going to move one, from the highest number to the lowest number. As these armies move, you'll move from spaces that give you a VP to spaces that no longer give you a VP. And that's really the gist of this movement. If they're in the space with a fortress, you can control these fortresses, or the royalists can control the fortresses. Once you've flipped that card and done the army movements, you move on to the next sections. They sometimes, as this one does, move one of the pieces of the track in a direction. So that example was Puritanism moving down like that. Or they'll give you a zeal point or a political reaction, which again moves some of these political markers. The majority of the gameplay in Cruel Necessity is focusing on these political tracks and a little bit on the army tracks here. Each of these spots on the political tracks have a blue triangle showing that you gain victory points, whereas these ones up here have a red triangle showing that you're going to lose victory points if the piece is on the space. You'll also notice that some of the locations on the map have a victory point marker, indicating that if the army is in that location, they give you a victory point. And then as well as if this fortification is owned by you, you get a victory point. And if it's owned by the royalists, you remove a victory point. Every turn, you're going to have a certain number of zeal points you can spend down here. In my experience, that ranges from around 7 to around 4 each turn. Each zeal point allows you to do one action. Many times, these actions are attempting to move one of these pieces up or down on the political track by rolling a die. These numbers here indicate the number that you have to exceed to successfully roll on that track. For example, if I wanted to move Scotland up one, I would roll a single die, and compare the number, which I got a 6 here, to the number here, meaning I could successfully move my piece from this spot to this spot. As you see me moving this map around, that brings me to one issue I have with the components, is that this map is split in half, which is really unfortunate because the components themselves are these really nice laser cut wooden pieces with decent graphics on them. I really enjoy these pieces a lot, but the map itself is less than ideal. Unfortunately, this brings me to the criticisms I have with this game, and they all kind of revolve around the same thing, which is randomness. You have between, in my experience, 4 and 7 points to spend, and that equates to 4 to 7 actions you can take. And the actions boil down to trying to roll some dice. So in this example, I had Puritanism go down. You don't want your pieces to go too far down because these have VP points. So let's say I want to get Parliament up on the track. There's a 3 there, so I take a single die, I roll it, and if I get higher than a 3, I can move it up. So that is great. But as you move it up to the spaces that actually have VP markers, you'll notice that a lot of them are 4s and 5s. And that's a real disappointment because if you spend your whole turn moving your zeal points for every die you roll, moving it down, sometimes you'll have a situation where you roll a die and you just, oh, a 3, I can't do it. Oh, another to 2, that's almost half of a turn wasted. And there is one way to mitigate dice in this game, and it's this marker here. Each turn you can spend a whole zeal point to put a dice roller modifier anywhere on one of your political tracks, or maybe on an army you would like to push back. And that's it, that's all you can do. And every time that you do an action, you roll a die, which makes me dislike this game. It makes me feel like all of my choices are random. I don't have any agency, I'm just rolling lots and lots of dice. Between this and the fact that sometimes your cards can have dice roll modifiers on them, I was in a situation where I was trying to move Catholicism. I got a dice roll modifier of +1 in Catholicism, saying I can move this track up because I want it to go back. And I think this is even cheating. I used my 1 point to add a dice roll modifier on Catholicism again, saying that I get +2 on every roll. And I rolled a die, and just like right now, I get a 1. This is literally a 1, and I got a 1, so that's, another zeal point down. And I roll again, and I get another 1. And then I got, I think it was a 2 and a 3, and my entire turn was gone. I played as perfect as I could. I had as many modifiers on a piece as I could, and nothing good happened. I had no choice in the matter other than to fail. And I don't mind losing, but I want to lose because I've played poorly or I've made a bad decision. And this, I feel like every time I succeed or I fail, it's just because I rolled some dice poorly or well. And it doesn't feel like a game at that point. It feels more like a activity. And there are some games that I like Stratomatic Baseball. That game has a lot of dice rolling. And a lot of times it really boils down to rolling dice and seeing the outcome. But that's a simulation. This, the box even says, this is not a simulation. It's meant to be an interactive, I forget, it was interactive lesson or something like that. And there is a lot of flavor. There's a lot to be learned here. Every card, as I said, has all this flavor. And there's a lot of these cards. So if you're interested in learning the Civil War, I guess this is a good game. But if you're interested in something that has strategic depth, something you can really dig your teeth into and have a war game, this isn't really it. So there are some people who like this game and they say, oh yes, dice rolls can be brutal, but they all pan out at the end. And I don't see how that's any better. If the dice rolls all even out at the end, that means they don't really matter. And if your only piece of agency is to choose which track to move up or down, or place this one dice roll modifier, then where's the gameplay? I can't find it. And like I said, this is a good, maybe people love this game because of the content and because of the theme, but it's not really for me. As I mentioned earlier, there is this battle display mat as another piece of gameplay here. Whenever you draw a card that has a red soldier and cannon on it, you do a battle. And this boils down to randomly choosing some of these wooden pieces, and same on this side, you randomly choose some wooden pieces. Sometimes you draw some cards and you compare the numbers, rolling some dice to adjust their modifiers or adjust the values. And that doesn't feel any better, especially when there's an optional rule to just skip this altogether. The optional rule says, yes, this table looks strange, but it uses the 2 dice bell curve to achieve a near complete mathematical simulation of the results from fighting out a complete tactical battle. And if your gameplay can boil down to a single dice roll with 2 dice without any input from the player, remember, you just draw these randomly. That's not intriguing gameplay to me. That doesn't even feel like gameplay if you're replacing it with rolling a single die. I've played this game both with playing on the battle mat and by just rolling a die to resolve the battle. And honestly, I prefer rolling the die. Mostly because it takes the tedium out of having to select these pieces and flip them over just to get a result that you can't control. Yes, you can designate this same zeal marker to adjust a single army up or down 1, but that doesn't feel like an intriguing decision. Most of the time, I would skip that because every time I did do this single strength point, it didn't affect the outcome because you're adding 4 plus 1 against your 3 plus 3, so 6 against 5, and then rolling a die didn't really feel like adding 1 either way was a good decision, especially because I want to move these tracks up and down, and having a single dice roll modifier I thought at least would help, and it never really did. And that's my thoughts on Cruel Necessity. This is a bit shorter of a review because I'm not a fan of talking at length about things I don't like. I don't like being cruel, for lack of a better word. It was hard for me, sorry it took so long to get this video out, it was hard for me to be motivated to play this enough to really know whether or not I liked it. The first time I played it, I was unsure. The second time, I started to get really into it. But the third and fourth and fifth times, I just it felt like a slog. I didn't like it. I felt like I was just rolling dice, looking at the outcomes and saying, cool, without really making many intriguing options or decisions. And I had so many games that I got recently from Gen Con that I would rather play, including the next review I'll do, which is Nunga Parbat, which I think is a cool theme and a really nice little brain-burny Euro game. But for now, thanks for watching.